Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. It's so good to see you today. I will have to especially thank Dr. Martin Whittingham and Emmanuel Kwame Tete, Professor Azuma for inviting me to this, and Sam Nwokolo, who I'm not sure whether he's here at the moment, and Georgina and everyone. I thank you so much for attending this today. I shall be speaking for about 20-30 minutes, and I guess by the time I finish, we probably would have a couple of questions or comments that we could go through together. So I will actually start by describing this widely held notion that Africans are deeply religious. And after that, I shall describe how some researchers on religion in Africa have responded to that idea. And then afterwards, I shall speak about my own research on peaceful Christian-Muslim relations in Nigeria. And then I will highlight some of its implications for us to reflect on. I shall then, of course, try to argue that there is some kind of connection between the idea that Africans are notoriously religious and the overestimation of the influence of religion on the way African Christians and Muslims live and relate with each other on the continent. I will clarify this further as we move forward. So let's just think a bit about this idea that Africans are deeply religious. So as you all know, scholars of Asia, they hold that Africans have believed in God and other spiritual beings for many centuries, long before their encounter with Christianity and Islam. And the work of John Mbiti is actually something people would normally refer to when this issue is being discussed. So the text he wrote in 1969, African Religions and Philosophy, on the first page, he wrote, and I quote, "Africans are notoriously religious, and each people has its own religious system with a set of beliefs and practices. Religion permeates into all the departments of life so fully that it is not easy or possible always to isolate it. Religion is the strongest element in traditional background and exerts probably the greatest influence upon the thinking and living of the people concerned." He adds on the second page that because traditional religions permeate all the departments of life, there is no formal distinction between the sacred and the secular, between the religious and non-religious, between the spiritual and the material areas of life. And wherever the African is, there is his religion. He carries it to the fields where he's sowing seeds or harvesting a new crop. He carries it with him to the beer party or to attend a funeral ceremony. And if he's educated, he takes religion with him to the examination room at school or in the university. If he's a politician, he takes it to the House of Parliament. He explains further that although many African languages do not have a word for religion as such, it nevertheless accompanies the individual from long before his birth to long after his physical death. And he says that where the individual is, there is his religion, for he is a religious being. It is this that makes Africans so religious. And religion is in their whole system of being. That was Mbiti. And then in the work of Geoffrey Parinder, we also see this idea, and he uses the term incurably religious to refer to Africans as well. Currently, as you all probably know, you might have come across this a lot in your own reading. It is very common for both Africans and many non-Africans to regard Africans as naturally or incurably religious, even more than others. This is due to various reasons, I think, two of which are the strong Christian and Islamic presence in African countries and the occurrence of religion-related conflict on the continent, In many African countries, like Nigeria, where I come from, I guess it's like that in Ghana as well, and many other places. Churches or mosques are located on most of the streets, and the majority of Africans identify as Christian or Muslim. And debates around religion, state, and law continue in some of the countries, such as Nigeria, and African immigrants, like here in the UK or in the US or in some other countries, are often regarded as deeply religious and sometimes more religious than those in their host communities. In an article that I read in 2017, sometime in March, I was able to note this because I've been thinking about this idea for a while. A Nigerian human rights advocate, he wrote, and I quote, "The reasons why Africans are the most religious people in the world are not far-fetched. Africans go through religious indoctrination from cradle to grave. Africans are not allowed by family, society, and the state to think, reason, or live outside the religious box. In Africa, religion is by force, not by choice. Religion is by compulsion, not according to one's conscience. Africans are brought up to believe that there is no alternative to religion, when in fact there is. So in Africa, either you're religious or you're nobody." So what I've been trying to do is just to describe how this idea is, how it actually functions, and how it works in people's minds and thinking about Africa. In another article that was published in 2016, Maya Grange here in Manchester, she examines the idea or suggestion in social science accounts of Africa that African social life is religiously determined. She observes that religion and Africa are paired in the representational armways of the social sciences, a pairing which, according to her, is often done uncritically without adequate reflection. She adds that this is common in religious studies and theology and other disciplines, including political science, sociology, and anthropology. Of course, I've also seen a couple of writings in the biological and natural sciences as well, for example, in terms of health and issues like that in Africa. And in Words of Power, a text which I guess some of us might have come across, the authors actually said that it is largely through religious ideas that Africans think about the world today. So before I speak about my research, I would just clarify the idea that has interested me actually isn't just that Africans are very religious, that they are deeply religious. It is the idea that this high level of religiosity actually means that religion affects everything, or probably most of what the African does. And they can hardly be understood without paying attention to that religion, or that Africa's problems can hardly be addressed without that central attention being paid to religion. In my own research on religion, peace, and conflict in Nigeria, I've read plenty of studies that claim that Nigerians are deeply religious, that this affects their relations with the religious order, that this makes religious leaders and other actors very influential in the country, and that this is a key reason for peace builders to pay major attention to religion. This view often connects the assumed high religiosity of Africans with the problematicness of religious difference. So the idea is that because these people are very religious, it is extremely difficult for them to live, coexist peacefully. There is a high level of religiosity. They attach a lot of significance and importance to that religious component of their identity, and that leads them into clashing quite easily with the religious orders. And that's actually what I've been interested in. That's what I think is my main problem, I would say, with this idea that Africans are very religious. And I hope we could discuss this a bit a bit more together. I hope to learn from you as well and tell you more about my own work. As you probably know, the idea that Africans are very deeply religious, it's something other writers in Africa have responded to. I've also been doing some reading about that myself. Some have challenged it. You know about Okot Bitek and John G. Pladvoet and Hank Ransom and their debates in the Journal of Exchange, yeah. And we can see a lot of these arguments in another article that was written by Franz Weissen. It was published in the same journal. Okot Bitek, for example, is said to be the first African scholar of religion to criticize the notion, particularly in the 60s and 70s. And there are arguments about this, which I wouldn't go in into deeply because of time, but I would just mention that Jan Pladvoet and Hank van Ransom, they did argue that the idea actually arose, especially in the 20th century, partly as some kind of post-colonial response to the pre-colonial and colonial description of Africans as being devoid of religion. And I would actually quote in their text, they said it's in response to the imagination of Africans as primitive, simple, childish, savage, brutal, barbaric, backward, retarded, without religion, full of superstition, black magic, witchcraft, witch hunts, and witch doctors, and those ideas. So it was in response to that those authors like Beatty and Parent and them, they were actually writing. But this is their argument, of course, which is not completely accepted by others. But I thought I should just put it out there. So what is my research about? And today I intend to just contribute to some of these studies, the voices that challenge this idea that religion permeates into all aspects of the African's life. My intention, however, is not to say that Africans are notoriously religious or that they are not. I'm also aware of arguments about secularization in Africa, and there have been a lot of writings about that issue. That's also not what I intend to think about with you. I aim to join you to reflect on the extent to which religion affects how African Christians and Muslims view and relate with each other. And by religion, I mean religious identity, or religious difference, actually. My intention is to tell you about my research on zones of peace in Nigeria, and perhaps you could also speak to me a little bit about other African contexts, which I may not be very much informed about. Zones of peace, it's a term that I used to refer to communities in the country where Christian-Muslim violence hasn't been recorded, especially since 1999 when the current Republic of Nigeria started. That's for my research. So based on the findings of my research, I intend to invite us to be careful to not overestimate the influence of religious identity or religious difference in relations between African Christians and Muslims. So what is my research about? So since 2017, I've been interested in how we can promote Christian-Muslim peace in Nigeria by examining peaceful relations between Christians and Muslims in the country, not the conflict-affected context. I have discovered actually that most studies of religion, peace, and conflict in Nigeria focus on the conflict-affected parts of the northern region. But recently, of course, there have been more studies of Christian-Muslim relations that are more peaceful in parts of the country, and people like Akintunde, Akinade in Sanot, and Lukoya Ogen, and Rebecca Jones, and Jonas Bont, and Laura Vinson, Robert Dowd, Jana Cross, and Kate Meha. They've written a lot about such settings in Nigeria. So in 2019, I spent about 7 months in Abuja. So Abuja is not, it's not entirely a zone of peace, but there are communities within that territory that haven't really recorded those cases of conflict. And Wuse, parts of Wuse and Otako districts, I was interested in them. So I tried to understand what's happening in those contexts and listen to religious leaders there and lay persons as well. And I would like to speak to you about that study. So I interviewed 17 Christian and Muslim religious leaders and up to about 74 lay Christians and Muslims. And some of the lay persons are those we may call poor, such as wheelbarrow pushers and butchers and petty traders in 2 open markets called Wuse and Utako Market. You probably know what a wheelbarrow is. I hope you do know, but in Nigeria, there are people whose livelihoods actually, they push wheelbarrows and they help people who buy fowl, chicken in the market to you know, kill the fowl and process it for them to take home, something like that. They don't get a lot of money from this, but that's what they do. That's how they survive. So I also spoke to people like that. And what did I find? So first of all, like I said, I spoke to religious leaders, and my interest was to understand the impact of religion. And when I was doing my study, I was interested in the role of religious leaders and religious peace building more broadly. But then I did find there were some findings about what we might call religious difference. You know? And the interviews with religious leaders did show that there was that understanding among religious leaders that religion, religious identity was important, right? This idea that people are deeply religious in the country. So the idea was that people were deeply religious, and as a result, it was important for them to be invited to be peaceful with the religious order. And that's actually where I link it with this whole idea about deeply religious Africans. So it seems the understanding is that, well, there is heavy impact that religion has on the ground. And it is very important, therefore, for us to continuously intervene to ensure that religious divides do not lead to religious conflicts. But then, in the conversations with the people who we may call ordinary, like I said, those other interviews actually showed that the reality on the ground was quite different from what was described, imagined by the elite. So in short, religious difference was not as problematic for believers as was perceived by religious leaders. Participants had chosen peace not necessarily due to religious reasons, but because of factors we might call practical, like self-protection and concern for family, the desire for survival and progress, and the wish to not experience the harmful consequences of physical violence. A Muslim taxi driver from a part of Nigeria called Kogi State in the north central part of the country, who was in his 30s, was unhappy that I suggested that it is only when religious leaders speak to Muslims about peace that they can adopt a peaceful attitude. And then he said, and I quote, he said, "I respect my imam, but I can't fight even if he tells me to fight. I'm peaceful for myself and my family. I have a son and a wife. What will happen to them if I die fighting? What about my mother?" It seemed these believers did not need to be spoken to about theological justifications for their adoption of peaceful behavior, for them to live peacefully with the religious order. It did seem that peaceful living in that context was perceived simply as something that was necessary for the protection of those practical interests that they had. So that said, I should clarify that my point is not that the residents of those areas were not religious. I did observe that they were quite religious. As in other parts of the country, churches and mosques in the area are well attended on Fridays and Sundays. The believers I interviewed were not unserious with their religious identity at all. The traders in the markets normally prayed before and after their daily trading. I saw religious objects in their shops and in the taxis that I used. So they were quite religious and maybe even deeply religious. The point, however, is that the religiosity did not prevent them from cooperating with religious orders daily in their quest for survival and progress. In the markets, for example, Christian and Muslim traders that I observed and spoke to, they actually cooperate to serve customers. The Christian looks after the Muslim's shop when the person has to pray. Religious differences were existing in the areas, but then they were not as divisive as one would understand from the interviews with the religious elites. And that's actually one of the points that I want to highlight. So I'm trying to not, I guess we could actually revisit these issues during the Q&A session. So I'll just try to conclude by highlighting some of the implications of this study. And just to remind us, the key question that I've been interested in is, to what extent does religion, or say religious identity or religious difference, influence the way African Christians and Muslims view and relate with each other? How should we visualize religion and contemporary Christian-Muslim relations in Sub-Saharan Africa? One of my key points has been that the idea that Africans are deeply religious and that religion affects all aspects of their lives is often connected to another idea that religious difference is generally problematic in Africa. Whereas this may be the case in some settings, especially in conflict-affected parts of the continent, it appears not to be the reality in those peaceful zones. In those areas, Christians and Muslims value their religious identity, but they navigate the religious differences daily as part of normal living, while they try to protect certain practical interests. In response to Samuel Huntington's Clash of Civilizations thesis, scholars such as Amartya Sen, they've highlighted the danger of seeing only or mainly the religious in people's identities. Huntington had actually understood religious difference as possibly the most profound difference that can exist between people. This presentation of mine actually invites us to be careful to not overestimate the influence of religion in relations between Africans, for whom, of course, Christianity and Islam are indeed major identity markers. The other question is, as you have seen, of course, my thinking has been largely shaped by my research on Nigeria, and I do understand that there might actually be different realities outside the communities that I've studied, even within Nigeria, and talk more of other settings on the continent. So my question, of course, which I hope you might have to address during the Q&A session is, to what extent can we generalize from communities in Nigeria? I recognize that there are settings and other areas where these religious issues might be more influential. So I'm not simply inviting us to adopt an unrealistic interpretation of Christian-Muslim relations in Africa that dismisses the problem of religious difference entirely. I hope to reflect on this further with you, especially in terms of what we might term variations in the impact of religion Christian, Muslim, and interreligious relations. But be that as it may, I think that we should pay more attention to peaceful Christian-Muslim relations in the continent. Among other things, the cases I have explored indicate that even as people take their religious identity seriously, the way they view and relate with members of other religious groups is not always shaped by religious factors. They show that Africans can be very religious and still not find religious difference problematic. They can be deeply religious and still not prioritize religion in their relations with religious others. Some commentators have said that although there have been conflicts between Christians and Muslims in Nigeria, the majority of Christians and Muslims in the country live peacefully with each other and do not find religious difference problematic. The same appears to be the case in other religiously mixed countries in Sub-Saharan Africa. So these are issues we would think about in the next few minutes. But then to conclude, I would say that I think the findings also show that part of how we can promote Christian-Muslim peace in Africa is to ensure that those other issues that matter deeply, strongly to believers are given sufficient attention. So such issues, they are very common and basic. And issues like how to survive and feed and get money and keep one's family safe and well. Those are very simple issues, we might say, but then they are still the most important for people, and they guide their actions and the way they view their world and how they relate with others in their environment. So I think at this point, I've already spoken for about 30 minutes as I expected. So I would stop and wait to receive your questions and hand you over to Martin. Thank you very much, Martin.